Hey folks, I'm Chris Thornton, this is Not School, and today I want to tell you the true story of how the Yorkshire accent helped to win the Second World War. A common misconception about Great Britain is that we all speak like the Queen, when in truth, now even the Queen doesn't speak like the Queen used to anymore. Take a listen.
Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day. My own family often gather round to watch television, as they are at this moment, and that is how I imagine you now.
Back then, who could have imagined that people would one day be watching this on laptops and mobile phones, as some of you are today?
Britain has an enormous variety and diversity of accents and dialects, and even though much faster modern travel and mass media have caused some homogenisation of regional accents, there are still huge differences for a country which is just 874 miles by road from John O'Groats at the very northern tip of Scotland to Land's End on the southern tip of Cornwall. To put that in context, that's roughly the same distance by road from the southern border of California to its northern border. On your Californian road trip, unless you ran into other tourists, you would likely only hear one regional accent, Californian English, which is itself a barely differentiated subset of the Western American English spoken by pretty much everywhere west of Texas. Covering that distance in the UK, however, you might move through the clearly distinct regional accents of the West Country, Bristol, the Black Country, Cheshire, Liverpool, Manchester, Lancashire, Sunderland, Glasgow and the Scottish Highlands. And even that list is a contentious one, with, for example, residents of the Black Country sure to mention that their accent is distinct from that of the Brummie accent of Birmingham, and people from the Scottish Lowlands wanting to be clear that they're not all from Glasgow, thank you very much. However, when people, even most British people, think of a quintessentially British accent, we tend to settle on what's known as received pronunciation, or an RP accent. This is the kind of standard, slightly posh accent typified by Lara Croft, James Bond, or most British movie villains, except of course for Christopher Eccleston in Gone in 60 Seconds, who, being from Salford, kept the Mancunian accent.
On this list you'll find 50 cars, 50. I need all 50 delivered to Long Beach Harbour, Pier 14, by 8 a.m. 4 days from now. I'm paying $200,000.
By that token, when actors who aren't actually British play a Brit, they tend to put on an RP accent, with varying degrees of success. Angelina Jolie as Lara.
What does everybody think is down there?
Well, I don't know what everybody thinks is down there, but I think it's the Lunar Temple.
Not bad. Kevin Costner as Robin Hood.
But what about our kids? Sheriff's taking all they got too.
And by God, we take it back.
Kevin. Given that the RP accent has come to be recognised as standard English, much to the annoyance of the 95% of the UK who don't actually speak like that, when the BBC began radio broadcasts, all of their hosts and announcers spoke with a standard RP accent. Even if they weren't actually from London and the home counties, where the accent is most commonly spoken, BBC hosts were expected to speak with this accent. This was a decision made by one of the key founders of the BBC, Lord Reith, who believed that RP would be the kind of speech which the largest number of people could easily understand. That all changed with the Second World War. Reich Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels took Nazi propaganda to never-before-seen extremes, pushing the toxic message of Nazism incredibly hard, both in Germany and across Europe. The relatively new media of radio broadcasts, television broadcasts and cinema broadcasts were central methods by which he had Nazis disseminate propaganda, alongside the more traditional printing and publishing methods. One of the reasons he was such a fan of radio was that with a strong enough transmission, it was a medium which could easily reach right across Europe and into the homes of people in non-Nazi controlled territories with no easy way to block the signal. Now, obviously, if people in Britain heard broadcasts in German, they'd be unlikely to listen, not least because British people haven't historically been particularly keen to bother learning foreign languages. Sure, the Germans could learn to speak in English, but with British sensitivity to its own regional accents, a German accent would stand out like a sore thumb. There was a solution for the Germans, though. If they spoke in an RP accent, then no one listening would be able to tell they weren't British. This created a real problem for the British, and this is where we get to the hero of our story, Wilfred Pickles was born in 1904 in this unassuming terrace house at 24 Conway Street in Halifax, West Yorkshire, just a few miles away from where I'm filming this video. As he grew up, of course, he developed a Yorkshire accent, or to be specific, a Halifax accent, as Yorkshire is a big place which even now has a range of local accents. He became an actor, first appearing as an extra in a performance of Julius Caesar at the Theatre Royal in Halifax. From acting on stage, he transitioned into radio work, being selected by the BBC as an announcer for their North Regional radio service. With the outbreak of World War II and the broadcast of Nazi propaganda, though, London came calling for Wilfred. In 1941, Pickles first read the news on the BBC Home Service. This was the first time ever that the BBC had featured a presenter with a regional accent. Although the regionalist RP accent was relatively easy for the Germans to impersonate, accurately replicating the nuances and inflections of a regional British accent was much more difficult. The thinking at the BBC was that an authentic regional British accent was a kind of audio watermark, and although a non-Brit might think they were reproducing it perfectly, a British listener would immediately be able to tell that the accent wasn't authentic. Kevin.
And by God, we take it back.
Now, Pickles did actually tone down his accent somewhat for most of the time when reading the news or making announcements, as you can hear in this clip.
After this broadcast, we're all dashing home. Barney's going to Leeds, Violet Carson to Blackpool, and the wife and myself are hurrying off to Yorkshire to spend Christmas with our own old folks.
Nowadays, even to my ears as a native Yorkshireman, that sounds pretty close to an RP accent, but for the time it was revolutionary. Although a lot of people welcomed the sound of a new accent on the radio, there was also outrage at the time, with reports claiming some listeners were less likely to believe the news when Pickles read it. Nevertheless, he became a household name. Following the war, he was a well-known celebrity in Britain, broadcasting in both his modified accent and a more authentic accent, as you can hear here.
Did you ever do a bit of courting?
Yes, you had here now.
Did you? That's champion. You've been up Mount Ararat then?
He enjoyed a hugely successful career, in particular with a BBC radio show called Have a Go, which ran for an amazing 21 years, at its peak attracting audiences of 20 million listeners, or nearly half of the entire population of Britain at the time. 5 years after the war ended in 1950, he received the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, one of the highest awards civilians can receive in the UK, for his services to broadcasting. These days, regional accents are extremely commonplace across broadcasting in the UK.
Tonight at 10, the first day at the Home Office for Sergeant Javid, who promises to treat Caribbean migrants with dignity and respect.
What I'll do is, if you're not speaking on the microphone properly, I'll say, "Yeah, Sean, get on the mic! You're on the radio, you idiot!"
Hey, love, I've heard better lines than that down Club Bongo.
Although they're unlikely to outright confirm bias against an RP accent, many broadcasters seem to actively avoid RP in favour of accents which more closely reflect how their audience speaks. As a Yorkshireman, I am of course extremely pleased about that, but it's strange to think that it may never have happened if Germans hadn't found my local accent so hard to replicate. And that's how the Yorkshire accent helped to win the war, whilst also changing the sound of radio and TV broadcasts forever. Thanks for watching that video. Do please let me know what you thought down in the comments, and please remember to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. You can check out another of these videos here to find out how a disgruntled undertaker invented the modern telephone exchange, or check out a video from my gaming channel, Not School Plays, of me playing Tomb Raider right here.